Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we even crack open the dossier today, I'm going to ask you to do something for me.
Yeah.
If you appreciate the fact that we don't shy away from the heavy stuff, the controversial stuff, the things that other shows are honestly just scared to touch, then hit that like button and subscribe to the feed right now. We really need that support to keep the lights on and keep bringing you these breakdowns.
And today, we are definitely going to need the lights on. I mean, we are looking at a text that frames itself less as a self-help book and more as a declaration of war.
No kidding. We are diving deep into an ebook called Virtue and Godliness, Daily Improvement Through Practice by Conrad Riker. And, I want to be super specific about who this is for right off the bat.
Right.
If you're a guy who feels like modern culture has completely lost the plot when it comes to masculinity, or if you find yourself nodding along to the men's rights movement or the red pill space, this deep dive is squarely for you.
It really is. It's an ultra-long, incisive, and honestly fascinating review of what Riker calls a battle manual for spiritual survival.
Yeah.
And just to be clear from the jump, Riker isn't interested in being polite. He argues that we're living through a specific moment in history, an era of what he terms institutional capture.
Right, where he says feminists and Marxists have essentially hijacked the controls of society.
Yeah.
It's intense, uncompromising stuff. He talks about reclaiming masculinity in a world that he says is actively hostile to it. And look, if what we discussed today sounds like something you need in your arsenal, don't just listen to us. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books immediately and buy the ebook.
Yeah, it's designed to be a tool, not just a casual read.
Right, it's meant to be referenced. And for ongoing updates, the author is very active on Substack at Conrad Riker. That's at ConradNriker. The text points to that repeatedly for what he calls daily fortification.
Which you're gonna need, because he starts with this massive foundational claim.
Oh, yeah.
He says society isn't just changing in a way that feels a bit uncomfortable. He claims society is engaged in an active spiritual and biological war against men.
And we should state here, our mission today is just to impartially report on what Riker has put in this text. We aren't taking sides. We aren't endorsing the politics, whether left-wing or right-wing. We're simply pulling the ideas out of the source material so you can understand the arguments being made.
Exactly. We're just looking at the architecture of his argument. Yeah. And he sets the stage by arguing that the institutions we rely on, schools, HR departments, the legal system, have been systematically sabotaged.
That's that institutional capture concept.
Right. The idea is that this isn't accidental drift. It's not just the pendulum swinging back and forth. He argues it's a coordinated effort to break the male spirit by capturing the institutions that used to support it.
And central to this whole breakdown is a concept he calls the double bind.
Yes.
This really stuck out to me because it feels like something a lot of guys intuit but can't quite put a name to. How does Riker define this double bind?
It's essentially a psychological trap. It's very similar to what game theorists might call a no-win scenario. Riker argues that modern men are placed in a vice grip. On one hand, society shames men for being toxic when they are assertive or strong or stoic.
Right, the whole toxic masculinity narrative.
Exactly. When they act like traditional leaders, they get penalized. But on the other hand, and this is the bind men are economically and socially punished if they actually show the vulnerability or weakness that society claims it wants to see.
He used a really specific example in the book that I thought was, it was heartbreaking but perfectly illustrative. The story of the firefighter, John Peterson.
Yeah, this is a crucial case study in the text. So Peterson is a firefighter. He rescues kids from a blaze.
Classic heroic action.
Right, classic masculine action. He's doing the job of the protector. Everyone celebrates him. He's a hero. But then in the aftermath, he mentions he's having nightmares about the fire. He shows that vulnerability that the culture insists men should show.
And what happens?
The script flips instantly. Whispers start in the firehouse. Can't handle the heat. Is he stable? He's gradually shunned by his peers and marginalized by his superiors. Riker uses this to prove that while society says it's okay to cry, the reality is that a man who cries is viewed as a liability.
It's the literal definition of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Riker points out the massive disconnect between, say, the sermons you might hear in church stories about David and Goliath confronting giants, having courage, versus the sensitivity training pamphlets you get at a corporate job that label male assertiveness as a microaggression.
It's spiritual whiplash. You're told to be a warrior on Sunday and a pacifist on Monday.
And Riker argues this is entirely by design. He dives deep into the history of how this happened. In education, he points to textbooks that label masculinity itself as toxic and systematically erase the role of fathers from history and literature.
Yeah.
But he hits hardest on the legal system.
I saw that stat he pulled from the National Registry of Exonerations.
That's the one. He cites data suggesting that a staggering percentage, he says something like 42% of exonerations involve false sexual assault claims.
That is a terrifying number for anyone navigating the modern dating world.
It is, and he uses that data to argue there's a presumption of guilt in the modern era. He references a 2009 Harvard Law Review study regarding Minneapolis fathers, where hundreds were wrongfully convicted based solely on unverified allegations.
Wow.
The book argues that the system is completely rigged to view men as perpetrators by default.
And then you have the corporate world. Riker calls vulnerability a sucker's game.
He's very firm on that point. He cites corporate data claiming that men who show vulnerability at work are labeled weak or indecisive 7 times more often than those who don't, and their leadership ratings drop significantly.
So his point is basically, do not fall for the trap.
Exactly. When HR asks you to be vulnerable, Riker says they are essentially handing you the rope to hang yourself with.
Which leads us into the philosophical backbone of the book. Because Riker isn't just talking about office politics or legal statutes here, he's talking cosmology. He brings up mannequinism and something called the CTMU. This is where the book gets surprisingly deep.
It does. He's referencing Chris Langan's cognitive theoretic model of the universe, the CTMU. Now, Langan is known for having one of the highest IQs in America, and his theory is incredibly complex, dealing with reality as a self-simulating language.
Right.
But Riker simplifies it for his purpose. He frames reality as a binary Manichaean struggle.
Manichaeism is that ancient religion, right, where everything is a battle between light and dark.
Precisely. Light versus dark, order versus chaos. And in Riker's framework, he maps gender directly onto this cosmic struggle.
So in this framework, masculinity is order.
Yes. Masculine order, or logos, the logic, the structure, the light, versus feminine chaos or entropy, the darkness, the void, the emotion. And Riker argues that biological determinism is very real. You cannot social engineer your way out of biology. He leans heavily on the case study of Sweden to prove this.
Oh, right, the toy bands. I remember reading about this in the source text.
It's a fascinating, if disturbing, example. Sweden implemented gender-neutral policies in preschools. They banned gendered toys. They started using neutral pronouns like hen instead of han or han. The goal was to erase gender differences entirely.
And Riker claims it backfired.
Catastrophically, according to his sources. He cites data claiming that following these policies, youth mental illness and suicide rates among boys didn't go down, they skyrocketed. He calls it chaos unchecked.
Because you're fighting nature.
Yeah.
You're basically trying to reprogram hardware with the wrong software.
That is exactly his argument. He breaks it down to neurology. He discusses how testosterone wires men for spatial navigation, risk assessment, and threat response. Meanwhile, oxytocin wires women for nurturing and social bonding.
Right.
Riker calls the denial of these roles cellular rebellion. He says it's like trying to run Windows on a Mac system failure. It's just guaranteed.
And he takes it a step further, calling it spiritual warfare. This isn't just biology to him.
No, it's highly theological. He references the biblical story of Solomon. Solomon was the wisest man, but his downfall came through his foreign wives who brought in foreign idols.
Oh, I see where he's going with this.
Yeah, Riker uses this as a metaphor for modern inclusive policies. He argues that when men abdicate their role as the order in the chaos, they aren't just failing politically, they are failing spiritually. He literally calls inclusive policies demonic because they invert natural hierarchies.
That is a heavy, heavy charge.
Yes, it is.
So if we accept Riker's premise for a moment that we are in this spiritual, biological, and institutional war, the next logical question for the reader is, how do we fight? And the book has a massive section on dominion.
And he's careful to define dominion because that word scares people. He doesn't mean being a tyrant who bosses people around. He defines dominion as being the load-bearing wall.
I really like that image, the wall that crumbles last.
It's about what he calls sacrificial leadership calculus. You sacrifice yourself to protect the family structure. But to do that effectively, you need power. You can't protect anyone if you're weak.
Makes sense.
And Riker gets very specific about financial power. He calls it financial anti-fragility.
This section was fascinating because it read less like a philosophy book and more like a tax strategy guide for the ultra-wealthy. He talks about the Rockefeller method.
This is highly actionable advice in the text. He suggests using grantor retained annuity, trusts, GRAT.
Break that down for us. What exactly is a GRAT?
Essentially, it's a financial instrument that allows you to freeze the value of your assets today and pass the future appreciation to your heirs completely tax-free. Riker views taxes, in this specific context, not as a civic duty, but as a weapon used by the state to weaken the patriarch and redistribute resources to the chaos.
So it's all about keeping the resources locked within the family unit.
Exactly. He also talks about making your assets invisible. Financial castration is the term he uses for losing your assets to lawsuits, divorce courts, or the IRS.
Right.
To avoid it, he recommends a specific stack. New Mexico LLCs for privacy, Wyoming series LLCs for asset compartmentalization, and Cook Islands trusts for ultimate protection.
The Cook Islands. That sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It really is the gold standard for asset protection. The goal is that if someone, a lawyer, a creditor, the government, looks for your wealth, they see absolutely nothing. You own nothing on paper, but you control everything.
He also mentions crypto and metals, right?
He does. Physical platinum stored in Singapore, specifically Singapore because of its jurisdictional stability. And for digital assets, he advocates for Monero and other privacy coins.
So he wants you completely off the grid.
He's advocating for a complete parallel economy where the state cannot touch your resources. His logic is if you are dependent on the system, you are vulnerable to the system.
Which brings us to the social side of this dominion concept. Because you can't fight a war alone. He talks about the Brotherhood Armory.
This is his modern equivalent of the medieval guild. Riker argues that open networks like posting on Facebook or LinkedIn are incredibly dangerous because of cancel culture and corporate spies. He suggests forming guilds on encrypted apps like Signal.
He had that great line about the Venetian glassblowers.
Right. The glassblowers of Venice had trade secrets they protected with their lives. Riker says daggers worked better than NDAs.
Man.
He's saying men need tight-knit, encrypted circles where they can speak freely, share strategies, and support each other without fear of HR finding out or some tweet resurfacing 10 years later.
And to stay sharp for all this, managing trusts, running guilds, fighting spiritual wars, he prescribes cognitive discipline.
Cognitive fasting, he calls it. He compares the modern brain on social media to an overcooked, noodle-soft, malleable, and basically useless. He cites a study from the University of Chicago about prefrontal cortex thinning in heavy media consumers.
So what's the protocol he recommends?
It's a massive dopamine detox. Cutting Netflix, cutting social media, cutting the endless scroll. The goal is to restore the ability to focus and plan long term. You can't build a dynasty if you can't pay attention for more than 15 seconds.
So let's look at the map here. You've got your money hidden in Cook Islands trusts, your brain is sharp from cognitive fasting, and you've got your bros on Signal.
Yeah.
Now we have to talk about the home front. Relationships.
Right?
This is probably the most controversial part of the book, which is really saying something.
It is. He calls it jurisdictional jujitsu. Riker rejects egalitarianism in the home entirely. He argues that men must lead and women must nurture. If there is no captain, the ship sinks.
And he has this tactic called tactical friction. This blew my mind.
The grandfather's Cuban Missile Crisis strategy.
Wait, explain that to the listener. He wants you to pick fights on purpose.
Yes, as an inoculation. The theory is that you introduce small, controlled stressors into the relationship to build immunity. Riker argues that if you never argue, you have no conflict resolution muscles.
Oh, I see.
So when a real crisis hits, say, a death in the family or a financial collapse, the marriage just collapses because it's brittle. By staging tactical friction, you strengthen the relationship's ability to handle stress.
That is certainly a unique take. Like, honey, I started an argument about the dishwasher to save our marriage, but I guess it fits with his whole anti-fragile philosophy. You stress the system to make it stronger.
It does. And part of that defense is identifying threats before they get inside the perimeter. He has an entire section called Kryptonite Identification Protocols. He lists specific vectors of attack that men need to watch out for.
Let's run through a few of those. Vector 1 was financial.
Avoiding debt, specifically.
Yeah.
But also understanding the macroeconomics. He cites IMF data claiming that female-majority legislative bodies tend to increase sovereign debt.
Really?
Yeah. He warns men to insulate themselves from the inflation that he believes inevitably follows feminized fiscal policy.
And Vector 2 is judicial.
The family court system. He calls it gynocentric, meaning centered on women. He warns about the presumption of guilt in domestic disputes and the financial risks of divorce. This goes right back to the financial castration point. You need to structure your assets so a judge can't redistribute them.
Vector 3 was educational, which we touched on, removing sons from schools that preach gender ideology. And then Vector 5 was biological. This is where he gets into the really physical stuff.
This is the biohacking element to the book.
Yeah.
He strongly warns against soy, plastics, specifically Silettes, and tap water. He claims these contain estrogen mimickers that are physically, chemically castrating men.
He links this to the sperm count data, right?
Yes, the well-documented global drop in sperm counts and testosterone levels over the last 50 years. He's saying the war isn't just in the laws, it's literally in the water supply. If your testosterone is tanking because of the plastic bottle you're drinking from, you can't be the logos, you can't be the order.
It's a total siege mentality.
That is exactly the phrase Riker uses. Ideological siege engines. He wants men to view themselves as under siege and to build fortifications accordingly.
So what does this all mean for you listening at home? We've covered the diagnosis, the philosophy, the money, the marriage tactics. The book wraps up with what Riker calls the moment of ignition.
This is the final charge to the reader. He tells them you are not a victim, you are a warrior. The goal is to build an unassailable fortress of body, spirit, and finance. He wants men to stop complaining about the Matrix, stop posting online about how unfair it is, and start building their own ark.
And he contrasts two types of legacies. He calls it legacy cryptography. This was a really powerful image to end on.
It asks us a very provocative question. What code are you leaving for your grandchildren? Most men leave debt, consumer habits, maybe a house that eventually gets sold. Riker contrasts that with a 10,000-year clock mindset like Bezos or Musk.
Yeah.
The idea is to make decisions today that ensure your lineage survives and thrives for centuries.
It's about being a time billionaire in terms of your impact.
Exactly. He argues that if you structure your trusts right, if you instill the right values, your great-great-grandchildren will know exactly who you were. Your actions today are cryptographic keys that unlock their future freedom.
That is a massive shift in perspective. It's not just about getting by for the next 5 years.
No. And it brings us back to the core message of the book. It's not about being happy in the modern hedonistic sense. It's about being effective. It's about survival and dominion in a world that Riker believes is actively trying to erase you.
Well, if you are feeling that pressure, if you feel like you're the one holding up the load-bearing wall and the cracks are starting to show, this book is basically your blueprint.
Absolutely. We've covered the highlights, but the tactical details in the book, especially on the financial trusts, the specific workout protocols, and the diet are extensive. We honestly can't cover it all here.
So here's the call to action, guys. If you want the full battle manual, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Virtue and Godliness.
Yeah.
Don't just sit on this information.
And make sure to follow the author. He's at Conrad Riker on Substack and Twitter. The book is the manual, but the Substack is the daily intel you'll need.
Exactly. Go check it out on Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, if you appreciate us taking on the topics that other shows are too scared to touch, smash that like button, subscribe to the feed, and share this with a friend who needs to hear it.
Stay sharp.
And keep building that fortress. We'll see you on the next deep dive.